join the party, go to spectator.co.uk and get your first month absolutely free.
So, Peter, you've written a wonderful piece for the Christmas issue this year, talking about your first Christmas spent in the USSR in 1990 and also the last Christmas that the USSR saw. Can you tell us about your experience?
Well, we had to try and make something of it. We were there living in Moscow. I was correspondent at the time I arrived in the city in June and was living illegally in an extraordinary flat which belonged to the Communist Party Central Committee with the Brezhnev family on the other side of the courtyard. But we really were deprived of an awful lot of things that you would normally expect at Christmas time. We couldn't, we didn't particularly want to import British type food and stuff like that. We were trying to live as far as possible as if we were genuinely living there. And all this was mainly down to Mrs. Hitchens, who went out and bought all these astonishing things for us to eat, including the ingredients of an entirely Soviet Christmas pudding from all the then parts of the Soviet Empire, and the most marvelous goose, which she bought from an old woman sitting on a corner, from whom she could probably also have bought a bag of magic beans if she'd asked nicely. And the resulting Christmas dinner, though it was quite complicated eating it, because Christmas Day, the Western Christmas Day in Moscow, was not at all any kind of feast day, and the Congress of People's Deputies was busy meeting in the Kremlin, and all kinds of news was happening, was the most extraordinary Christmas dinner we ever had, and probably the best. So I thought it would be nice to recount how, in the middle of all this turmoil, which there was a lot of, we managed to have, for a few brief hours, something approaching Christmas in that extremely intimidating and enormous, thrilling but rather frightening city.
It sounds like Mrs. Hitchens very much saved the occasion there, Peter, but your 7-year-old daughter didn't seem to enjoy it as much. You say that she lost her trust in Santa Claus that year. Well,
she was a bit disappointed because she'd put down the usual list of stuff, and I think she probably thought, being as how we were in a cold, snowy place, it would get there quicker and more reliably. But the presents, when she opened them, all had this sort of slightly 1930s look, funny coloured things with dangerous corners and lumps on them, because Mrs. Hitchens had again gone out to the extraordinary Детский мир, the Children's World department store, which in those days stood right next to the KGB headquarters, and had bought what she could. But it didn't look like anything she'd asked for. So she immediately realised that Father Christmas had let her down quite badly, and obviously this was a blow. But she had to put up with all that kind of thing anyway, so it was all part of her growing up.
That's brilliant. And Robert, you were there in 1973 for Christmas for student exchange, so presumably you didn't have a very resourceful wife to help you make the day go well. I mean, how was it for you?
Well, I was a bachelor. I was in a student hostel in Leningrad, and Christmas wasn't even recognised very publicly by the Soviet authorities in that period, and it was grim. Yeah, it was a grim time. It was a grim day for a person who thought it was Christmas Day to go out on the street and not be greeted by someone, or not being able to greet someone who knew it was Christmas. So all of my colleagues had gone to Moscow for Christmas, because I got there not having a visa until the last moment, because I was studying Lenin. So I was marooned there and feeling pretty sorry for myself.
So what did you end up doing all day?
I booked up. God, it was really clunky in those days. To get a telephone call back to the UK, you had to book it a week beforehand, and go to a telephone kiosk bank in the centre of the city, where you would have a 20-minute slot to talk to your family, or you had to pay for it and so on. It was all very, it was like going into a hospital.
And not a very good hospital at that.
No.
Did you? I assume you had some cockroaches for company. I mean, the kind of place you put up. They always supplied plenty of cockroaches in the Soviet Union and rats as well.
God, yeah, the cockroaches in the hotels. I remember, did you ever get kicked out of hotels because they had a cockroach day, and the cockroaches would be fumigated, and then you'd be allowed in.
I had some very weird hotel experiences in the Soviet Union, but that wasn't one of them. The best was was discovering that my assistant had been rung up all through the night, on the hour, every hour, by someone from the KGB posing as a prostitute, offering her services to my female assistant. And she'd said to her in her perfect Russian, "Look, you're ringing the wrong room. We've swapped rooms. It's my boss you want a proposition." And the woman said, no, these are my orders. I have to ring this number all night. So she got it. But that was the weirdest hotel. But never a no cockroach day. Plenty of multiple cockroach days, but never a day when they claimed to be getting them out. And rats as well. I mean, it was a lot of squalor, but we were fantastically spared from most of this because of this extraordinary place we lived in. It was marvelous, 14-foot ceilings and oak parquet floors and chandeliers, because we'd got it from a member of the nomenklatura in an illegal let. And the block committee had come round to complain that we were there. And then when they'd seen the children, they'd done that thing which Russians do when they see children, and got completely soft-hearted and said, "Okay, you can stay." Then that's how we managed to hold on to it. So we were spared an awful lot of the horrors of Soviet life while we lived in that place. It was one of the nicest places I've ever lived, actually. Lovely views, river one side, Kremlin up to the university the other, and I'd say the feeling of being in Moscow, very powerful.
The really big event was New Year's Eve, when Leonid Brezhnev, the general secretary of the party, gave his annual speech, and he absolutely ceaselessly burbled on, it seemed, and it was the first time that the Soviet students in the same hostel started to show some sort of tittering disrespect for their great leader. It was so embarrassing because he couldn't even read his own speech, and this was in 1973. This was 9 years before he died, so he was already in a bad way.
Yeah, he was a figure of fun for a long time. There was a thing called Soviet rock, where people would play the 33 RPM records of his speeches, and they'd push them forward with their fingers to the applause. And it was a great joke, but it was a long and tragic period. But he was gone by the time we were living in the block. But his family was still there. We couldn't park our car on that side of the courtyard because all these ferocious grandmas would come out and drive you away if you came too close. The Andropov family also was still there. It was marvelously privileged, and you didn't have any trouble with crime.
Well, Peter, actually, because of the year that you were there, what was that like as the USSR was disintegrating around you? Did it feel like that at the time? And were you protected from the elements of the politics side of things?
We didn't know it was going to end so soon. I mean, I'd gone there obviously to witness the end of it and to see what would happen. That was the whole idea. But we didn't know how quickly it would come. And we didn't know how it would come, and a lot of very dark things happened after that Christmas. Anyway, a few days later, after Christmas, I was in Vilnius when the KGB went mad and started massacring people. And then, of course, Yanayev, the awful drunk who had become vice president during that Christmas, was the leader of the putsch, which happened in August. And I was there in the same block in August when the tanks came down the street. We didn't know how it was going to. It was completely thrilling. It was quite frightening, but in a sort of controlled way. You felt, although you were right on the edges of European civilization, you didn't really know what sort of government it was. It wasn't that totally alarming thing you can get in countries where there is utter chaos. You felt that deep down underneath there was a desire for order of some kind, and that you were fundamentally safe. I don't think I would have been able to take children there otherwise. But it was thrilling, exhilarating, terrifying. And I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Robert, you were there that year too, in December. What was that like? Would you agree with Peter's analysis?
I do indeed. I mean, for Soviet watchers, it was thrilling, yeah, and frightening at the same time. A little memory comes back to me now of going into one of these big stores that they had in central Moscow in December 1990, and it was a dairy supermarket, and there were 15 or so smartly dressed young women standing behind the counters. And in this dairy supermarket, there was absolutely not even a half litre of milk.
Wow.
And I remember thinking then, this mighty Soviet state, with all of its nuclear weapons, with all of its pretensions to summit diplomacy, it can't last. It must be soon on its knees. It was a really dramatic moment for me. I remember that I could buy a little packet of tea in the dairy supermarket, but there was no butter, no yogurt, no milk.
No, all that stuff you had. If you'd gone around the back to the black, the churny cord, the black exit, you would have been able to buy that stuff, or of course do what we did, which was this is without resorting to hard currency. If you're prepared to pay over the odds in rubles, there were very good markets where, as I say, we bought the fantastic ingredients for the Christmas pudding and the wonderful dried fruits coming up from by the Caspian Sea, because there you were in the center of this great empire. People would struggle up with suitcases full of raisins and whatever it was and sell them for a tiny profit. But there were fantastically elaborate black market systems. A friend of mine used to swap vodka, which she bought in Moscow, for chickens, which a friend of hers provided from Riga, and she'd put them on the overnight sleeper and with a fee to the sleeper attendant, and that's how she got her chickens. That's how people were getting things. The shops, it's true, had nothing in them, but what was amazing was how people survived even so. Of course, the system was, as you rightly say, collapsing, but the funny thing was in Moscow particularly, if you had any kind of money or contacts, you could get your way around a lot of it, and the back exit was crucial to all these things as well.
And Robert, you and Peter have both hinted at this, but the Soviet state was not exactly naturally friendly to the idea of Christmas. Can you tell us about the ways in which the USSR tried to eradicate these traditions throughout its regime?
Yeah, well, right from the start, it was a militant, atheistic state. So they wanted rid of religion, and they wanted rid of Christmas. So they found it impossible to do that. I think they did a survey of the Red Army in the Second World War 20 years later, and they found that half the soldiers still believed in God. So it wasn't so easy to get rid of Christian or Muslim or Jewish belief. So what they tended to do was to have their own ceremonies, have their own rituals. And they had one for Grandad Frost instead of Santa Claus. Actually, Lenin had his own Christmas tree, It came from a Lutheran background originally. So his family had the sort of German idea, like the British now have, of the Christmas tree. But they never succeeded in getting rid of the great religious faiths. And it was in 1990, going back in the late 80s and early 90s, that the Soviet authorities finally said, we must have some degree of religious tolerance. And Gorbachev, among his achievements, was to impose this on a communist party whose members had been brought up to renounce all metaphysical magic, as it was called. So it was a huge change from, say, 1973, when the churches were locked up, they were dank, they were dreary, and usually it was only old women who were creeping into them because they had nothing to lose. Young people who did so had everything to lose. They had their whole careers to lose.
Well, it sounds like an incredibly unique experience for you both to have had, considering that the USSR is no longer here. Peter and Robert, thank you so much for joining Spectator TV.